outside, saw my broken body on the ground, my father standing over it.
And my husband found work with the Canadian Pacific Railway. It was the only place willing to hire Irish immigrants because...
We never had a House of Parliament, so there are rumors that this was a House of Parliament to our left, but it isn't. This is a City Hall, always has been. To the right, this park was undeveloped right up until 1967. This park is called Confederation Park. It was built to celebrate the 100th anniversary of our Confederation, and the fountain's called Centennial Fountain, with 26 spouts to celebrate our 4 territories, 10 provinces, and several capital cities. 12 capital cities. To the right is the Crawford Wharf, where you can catch a tour with the Island Belle, the Island Star, and the Island Queen. Discovery Cruiser, Sunset Cruise, enjoy the Thousand Islands. Up ahead, normally we'd be able to go to Fort Henry, but unfortunately the Bascule Bridge was demolished in a construction accident in March of 2024, and eventually they just scrapped the bridge in June of 2024. Pretty recent. Not the first bridge we've ever had, not the last one we'll ever have, but it will take a few years to replace. To the left, this is the Springer Market Square. This market square is the oldest one of its kind in North America. It is a farmer's market since 1801. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, home bakes, produce in season, flowers, you name it. Throughout the summer, they've had movies in the square, dancing in the square, lots of musical events. In the winter, they will make this into an ice rink, and that beautiful fountain where people are standing around will eventually become a Christmas tree stand with a huge Christmas tree. And right next to it, a giant Hanukkah menorah. Because, hey, this is Kingston, multicultural. Jack Astor's over to the right there. That used to be Dominion Bank. A&W Hamburgers up ahead to the left. That used to be Bank of Canada. It's still the original building. If you go inside, some of the counter space still looks like bank counter space. It's at the foot of Queen Street. Alright folks, this trolley stop, we're not really stopping here, I'm just stopping to show you. This is the SS Keewatin. And the SS Keewatin was in fact a luxury liner, ocean-going vessel. 70% the size, twice the luxury of the SS Titanic. Not haunted, but it has been afloat for 117 years. It became a Great Lakes cruise ship when larger cruise ships started being created. And now it's just open for tours and lunch dates. You're welcome to go and have a look inside. So Lord of Sydenham, buried in the churchyard. Now that's not so bad, he's still outside, but one day that church did burn down. When they rebuilt it in 1854, the stone structure had a larger perimeter, which exceeded the boundaries of his gravesite, so now he's inside. We made a liar of him after all. But he's not haunting the place. He triple buried him in a wood box surrounded by an iron top and surrounded by a big wood casket, so his spirit can't escape. Over here to the left, this is the Pump House Museum, part of the History of Motion Tour. This is a water distillery plant. Water purification was very significant in our history because we used to have waterborne illnesses like cholera and typhus. And these were transmitted not only on land, but at sea when people would voyage. Not everyone could sail on the Keewatin in luxury. Some people sailed in economy style. An economy passenger ship had a little berth shaped like a bunk bed. They called them coffin ships. 7 feet by 4 feet by 2 feet. Not very roomy at all. Aptly named though. You would contract cholera or typhus on board sometimes because of your close proximity to other passengers and die on your voyage. Many people were sailing here from Ireland during the potato famine times, 1839 to 1853. Potato famine wasn't just about a failed potato crop, it was about a failed crop that was sort of a last sort of straw, I guess you could say, in a series of unfortunate events, such as the British hoarding all the wealth and all the agriculture, and all kinds of people getting sick, and lots of unemployment. It was very unfortunate. The tornado famine caused mass emigrations, and a number of Irish arrived here already deceased on board those coffins. The captains were charged a 10-cent tariff for every body they brought to the shores of Kingston. 10 cents doesn't sound like much, but 30 or 40 deceased passengers amounted to $3 or $4. $3 or $4 meant roughly third of the profit from the voyage. He didn't want that to happen. He tried burials at sea, but the shipping corridors along the ocean were soon littered with so many bodies they were bumping into the hull as the next ship passed through. So they had to have a treaty called the Atlantic Accord, which prohibited the tossing of bodies overboard in the ocean or in the St. Lawrence River. Didn't stop them from using the Great Lakes, though, so they would do victory laps in Lake Ontario, and thousands of bodies were To the right, eventually Donald McNeil tried to do different aggressive things, like he created that house, which was a home for the Northern family, to ensure that they didn't have to live in United Kingdom. He did that for his success at Rahasya. Now we're in the Portsmouth Village settlement in 1784, and as I told you, this settlement grew with the prison system and the asylum. So they eventually had township status, and the town hall was directly where left Peter's drugs. This was an inn and tavern. And this street over here for you young, Toronto, is Young Street. Turn left on Young Street, that's the first right, that's Sports Young Street's just along the way. All these houses are here protected with the exception of the real estate office up ahead and the Tim Hortons. Beyond the Tim Hortons, we have a beautiful church, hosted by the United, and beyond that, another example of Donald McNeil's benevolence is the Church of St. Business. Business is a patron saint of the London and country. Receives absolution while being crucified. And this is the church here. Notice it's made of limestone. Some of the limestone is brown and it's brought in from Maryland and Erie. Comes under the ground brown. Limestone comes under the ground blue here. Limestone eventually turns white with light exposure, but the brown stuff stays white. To the left, this is Kingston Penitentiary, 20 small homes for our homeless war veterans. It's progress, folks. We're moving in the right direction. We have a lot of homeless here. And pretty soon, a 180-bed facility will open in September at the extended care facility at the end of Portsmouth Avenue. To the right, we have the Providence Care Hospital. And this is a place of mental health care as well as respite, wellness, recovery, and rehabilitation. But previously, mental health care was handled by the Rockwood Asylum, which was originally created to be an asylum for the criminally insane or lunatics. They called them that, and they had no basic human rights, not until the late 1890s. Prior to that, they were experimental subjects, and they were property of the asylum, and they were simply mistreated. Which is why this is the most haunted place in Kingston. The building is haunted, it's filled with spirits. Take pictures of the windows when we get there. I promise you, if you manipulate the pictures manipulate the colors, the contrast, the brightness, the size, the dimensions, you will see spirits looking back at you. Everyone does. The whole idea was that Dr. Litchfield, who came here from England, said, if you build me a home nearby and an asylum, I will take care of the problem for you. But he didn't really have a good plan of care. It was a bit of quackery. He restrained and sedated. He fed them opiates and alcohol to keep them docile and sleepy. Restrained them with lashes to their beds and walls. And this resulted in what you would expect from unchecked substance abuse: eventual sickness, organ shutdown, organ failure, agony, and death. And that resulted in a vacancy, and the province liked that part. Oh, we only have an 8-bed facility, but we're processing hundreds of people per year. I don't know how you do it, but keep doing it. In fact, about 10 years in, can we build you a larger place? The original place was here, and this was Rockwood House on Interstate Lane. And they put the asylum downstairs, 8 beds, and they put his home right upstairs, right on top. So the screams of agony that came from the people suffering came up through the floorboards for his family to endure. Including his children. Don't mind those noises, too. These grounds, definitely haunted. Angry presence walking these grounds. If you're a spiritual sensitive, you will get frightened. Some people don't know they're spiritual sensitive, and they walk their dog here and then they never come back. It's amazing. Over at the prison, some people hear moans and groans coming out of cell block E. They don't even know why. Other people don't hear it. Some people don't know they're spiritual sensitive. Some people do. Anyone on here a spiritual sensitive and know it? That's wonderful. Are you feeling the presence right now? Because we're on the road. Did you know you can drive through Chernobyl, stay on the pavement, and not experience any radiation? It's like that here. The spirits are confined to where they're buried. They're confined to where they were trapped in the buildings. So you don't really experience them here on the road. Now, Dr. Litchfield was eventually given this larger facility. What nobody realized about Dr. Litchfield all this time, though, was he was not a doctor. He was a con man. No more a doctor than Dr. Phil. How's that working for you? But he was the son of an English surgeon, a friend of Sir John A. Macdonald, an impressive man with a nice black suit. My goodness, I could pass for a doctor. I got a nice black suit. I don't think I could pass for a doctor. All right. Anyway, Dr. Litchfield was eventually discovered. Let me tell you how. It's kind of amusing. But first, let me just show you. The 4-square building here that we're closest to, this was the asylum. This was the whole place. Just this one piece. For years. And eventually it filled up and it became overcrowded. It was meant for 40 people. They got 60 people in here. So they built more pieces to the left and right until they eventually had this 460-bed facility that they crammed 1,100 people into. Isn't that something? 1,100 people. The overcrowding was agony enough. So Dr. Litchfield was so successful at this asylum, they brought him help with other medical doctors. And the other medical doctors knew that if they reported him, they would lose their credentials because this place was too successful to fail. So they tried experimental psychiatry in the late 1800s, 1880s or so. They tried things like Freudian psychiatry. One of them got himself stabbed to death for his troubles. He still patrols the hallways though. He might be dead, but he still goes room to room checking on people. If you catch him though, he'll duck into a room and disappear. Familiar dark frame glasses. Really nice lab coat, 8 buttons long. Here's one of those headbands with the cut through. Now I circled around because I want to give you a more distant view. You notice we have security here? They're constantly patrolling. Most of these buildings are condemned, unused. They have lights on the outside but not on the inside. The building behind us is used by the Ministry of Housing, I believe, and Municipal Affairs. The Leahurst Psychiatric Care Center is closed now. All psychiatric care is being handled through the Kingston General or the Providence Care Hospital. Much more nurturing than this place ever had. This place had 4 kids. That's why the spirits are not at rest, and they're all watching you right now. To the left is suspiciously elevated property. Bless you. The suspiciously elevated property is definitely a mass grave. We had a spiritual sensitive walking over here once, and she felt the angry presence. I can't invite you to get out and walk around. Security sees that, they will ban our trolleys. We used to have people walk around and get lured into the property and disappear for an hour at a time. We'd have to send security to look for them. Or sometimes we would have to send another trolley back an hour later just to go find them. But one of them walked up the stairs to the left, and she felt such an angry presence she came scrambling back, fell on her hands and knees partway back. Told the trolley driver back, this was about 9 years ago, told the trolley driver to drop a necklace, asked him to go retrieve it. For their windows to be bricked up. Hey, please brick up my windows. Why? One, they were afraid that was bad spirits, and two, they were afraid that they might be next. Many prisoners would end up in the asylum if they didn't behave themselves. And as I said, the original prison, when it was first built, was run by Henry Smith, a very strict warden, who in fact was quite insane. Henry Smith believed in a silent regime. Silence meant no communication of any kind, no talking to one another, no hand signals, no eye contact, no passing notes. Break the silence, receive the laugh, and that included crying in despair. And remember, this prison was a place where they incarcerated men, women, and children. Yeah, you can put a child in prison for their crimes. The youngest prison inmate in the history of the Kingston Penitentiary was Antoine Boat, a mere 8 years old. Antoine Boat was a pickpocket from Montreal. The judge described him as an old criminal soul because he was not sorry for what he did. He was taught by his brothers to be tough. His brothers were in prison with him, by the way. They were 12 and 19 years old. They arrived on a steamship out of Montreal, and they found themselves all in prison, along with a friend of theirs. Antoine would snort and swear and belch and fart with glee and laugh and sing. He didn't realize that he was going to be in trouble for doing those things, but eventually he was. He received the laugh some 47 times in a 9-month period, which broke the boy's spirit so badly he was silent for the rest of his 3-year sentence. How can you do that to a kid? Well, back then, they just believed they had to. Criminal justice was terrible in those days. I would compare some of the gallows experiences to lynchings, not criminal trials. It was terrible. One of the other children that stayed there was Elizabeth Green, 12 years old, charged with perjury. She didn't know where her father was, but he was a wanted man. They didn't believe that she didn't know where he was, so they put her in prison for perjury. 30 days. Doesn't sound like very long, just the same 12-year-old girl 30 days in a prison. How frightening is that? The prison itself was subject to systemic prison issues, which included prisoner-on-prisoner violence. That included prison rape. And Elizabeth was not spared. She took her own life after only 14 days. She couldn't stand it. Then there was Patricia Cardell. It was believed that she arrived from South America. She spoke Spanish. We're not sure where she came from. I guess her family died, and she was kind of unsupported when she got here. She spoke mostly Spanish, little English, and she was starving. She got the idea of sneaking into a hotel, disguising herself as a waitress, because back then child labor was a thing. Which I believe to be physically impossible. I was not a scholar in university. I was all about equations, physics, computer science. There is no way to hit that sign and make it come through the windshield. Trust me. No way in the world. This prison is a place of unrest. George Huell is not the only person on the property, angry, being taught about as a serial killer mass murderer. There are other people here who are angry. They were never buried, given proper burial rights. They did not receive what you would consider to be a just sentence or just treatment during their sentence. Some people were sentenced for being Paris was a Robert James, and his fiancée Elizabeth was so forlorn that she never ate, drank, or talked to anyone again. She examined the waters of Hamilton Cove several times and eventually died from a broken heart. We now call that depression, or the spectrum order of depression, which is failure to cope. And now, she and Robert are reunited on Cedar Island. People go there to camp at Cathcart Tower, and they will see the spirits of Robert and Elizabeth wandering around barefoot, dirty faces, vintage clothes, laughing and happy, reunited again. I wish I could show it to you. It's a nice little island. There is a way to get there. You just have to take one of our water taxis or Port Henry shuttle. Meanwhile, back at the hospital where the cadavers were being collected, eventually they raised the price to a nickel to encourage people to bring the bodies in, and eventually there wasn't as plentiful a supply as they were starting to cure, or rather control the spread of cholera. So the price kept going up and up and up. $1, $1, $1, $2, $5, $10, $20 was the cap before they put a stop to the program altogether. $20 was so irresistible, people were committing capital crimes. It was like having $10,000 in your pocket. You could buy a horse. You could buy a carrot, or put a down payment on it. You put a down payment on a piece of property and build a house. $10,000. Back then, well, it was $20. People committed the capital crimes of murder and grave robbery. If you were caught committing those crimes, you ended up at the courthouse and the gallows. You were executed on the gallows. You ended up being the next cadaver at the university. The courthouse itself did practice criminal justice, but as I said, in its infancy, criminal justice was so unregulated, you often wondered, was it justice or was it a lynching? It was very racially motivated, and we know criminal justice in the U.S. and Canada is still racially imbalanced. Too many men of color in the prison system. The racial imbalance was pretty bad back then too. Emancipated slaves did not have great opportunities. They were driven to commit crimes. Often those crimes were not capital crimes, but they were exaggerated by the courts, and people ended up in the gallows. You were caught with a watch that it looked like it wasn't yours. Obviously you committed murder to acquire that watch. They wouldn't even investigate. They'd just, conclude. And then they would hang you. Out back of this courthouse is where the gallows was situated. Now this house that they're building to our left here, and this parking lot, all of this was just a big empty field. So you had had a dead house here, they had a gallows here, and most of this land was just a place to gather and observe. Observe what? Well, watch a hanging. Very interesting. That was entertainment in the old days. Why did you do that? See your beautiful child. Be your delightful. Be your exciting. You're a feather in my... It's over. Sorry, a little gallows humor because I'm telling dark tales. This is Macintosh Castle. Let's get a closer look at it, okay? Macintosh Castle was built in the 1850s by John Macintosh. John Macintosh loved his wife. He wanted her to come to Canada with him to help build his business. She wanted to stay in England because she lived in a nice English castle. Uh-oh, my batteries are dead on my flashlight. Oh, there we go. There we go. So this beautiful castle, as you can see, the lights are on. It's a vacation rental. You too can rent Macintosh Castle. It's like a bed and breakfast. Well, when John Macintosh built this castle, it was to attract his wife's attention so she would come to Canada and live here with him while he expanded his business. She saw the pictures and she says, okay, I'll come. She gets on board one of those economy passenger ships called coffin ship. And on her way here contracts cholera, dies, and never sees her castle. Very sad. Because of a sad story, a lot of people don't like going to this particular vacation rental. They'd rather go to the place next door, the Rahasya Inn. Myself, folks, I mean, I would love to build my wife a castle one day. Don't know that it's necessarily possible. You know, I mean, I have this little flower box, and when it fills up, I buy her flowers. But maybe one day it'll really fill up, and I'll build her a castle. To the left, this is the Rahasya Inn. And this land belonged to John Macintosh. And previously, prior to that, it belonged to the courthouse. And a lot of the bodies that were built here were still buried here when they started to develop on the land. People didn't wait a respectable amount of time before they started reusing land, let me tell you. So this place is haunted. Footprints in the carpet, similar to the Frontenac Club. Similar to the Frontenac Club, footprints appear in the carpet mysteriously. Usually it happens to the staff, not to the guests. Staff will clean up, put away their equipment, and a set of footprints will appear in the carpet, which usually spooks them. Some will quit, some will just clean it up again. Over the decades and the centuries, it just keeps happening though. Some people speculate that it's possible that the spirits are coming from these townhomes. These are carriage houses.
No charge.
And these carriage houses used to have livestock downstairs and servants upstairs. Some of the servants weren't too keen on that. So if I were them, I'd come back and haunt the place too. Sorry if I frighten one of the residents. Up ahead is the Rosemount Inn, also haunted. The Rosemount Inn is a very luxurious, well-appointed, nice old bed and breakfast. There's an old inn, and at one time we had a very dissatisfied patron who had her purse tampered with. She was very dissatisfied, and she demanded they take care of it by restoring all the contents of her purse, which they couldn't do. They tried compensating her in other ways, and it wasn't acceptable to her. So now she comes and haunts the place herself, and she will go after your purse if it's unattended. Revenge. It's haunted, but it's not actually the church that's haunted, it's the organ. The organ itself doesn't play by itself, but the organists will experience angry spirits. Much like our medium or our psychic who went wandering over at the asylum, you just feel the angry presence while you're playing the organ. But you'll only feel that presence if you play incorrectly, play badly, or play the wrong tune. The wrong tune could be something like Inagata Vida, Take Me Out to the Ball Game. The spirits want you to play something church appropriate. Glenn Shackleton of the Haunted Walks is the one who interviewed the organists back in the mid-90s. Many of the organists he interviewed were going back 30, 40, 50 years and talked to them on the phone. Hairs in the back of his neck stood up on end because they all told similar stories about the angry spirits. That's the whole story. I won't embellish it. But I will tell you, as we pass Chalmers Church on the left, built in 1849, it's a magnificent structure. They still have wonderful services. And to the right, this school is Sydenham Public School, the oldest school in Canada, still operating as a public school. And up ahead, there's just enough light left in the sky that you might be able to see the outline of St. Mary's Catholic Cathedral. I don't know if it's haunted or not. It really ought to be. There are 48 souls buried in hallowed ground underneath the church, including 5 bishops and 4 nuns. Has anyone ever seen the movie Skyfall? The James Bond film. I don't read enough, so I learn about history from watching movies. Anyone ever heard of a priest hole? A priest would escape through a hole in the church and then go give last rites to people at various locations and then come back to the church. Well, there was a tunnel from here to Hotel du Hospital. And the priest would escape through the priest hole. It still exists, the tunnel. Here, St. Mary's Catholic Cathedral is 242 feet high. At its crest, where the crucifix is located, there's a bell tower. It's the highest, tallest structure in Kingston. By city ordinance, nothing appears higher on the skyline. Very expensive to build tall towers in the 1800s. They ran out of money, and they asked for donations to complete the construction, including the installation of stained glass windows. That money came from one benevolent, generous donor named Sir John A. MacDonald. To the right, this big pink house. It's called Elizabeth House. 13 lovely bedrooms. The family that lives here has 10 children, so it's helpful to them. They were installed by a worldwide outreach organization called Chabad, a Jewish organization of outreach. This is the Chabad Student Center. They're going to welcome the students here from Queen's University who care to be welcomed by them. Previously, it was a women's shelter. Women were sheltered from being deprived of their fundamental rights by a doctrine called virtue. Women couldn't vote, couldn't own property. They were told how to dress and who to marry. Pretty hard way to live if you were a woman or anyone. And that shelter prevented them from having to give in to people who enforce doctrines like virtue. To the left, this is St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church is where Sir John A. attended services for his worship. He may have donated to the Catholics, but he was Presbyterian. This church does a lot of outreach as well, clothing and food assistance for people living rough on the streets. They accept donations. And to the right, not a church anymore, but this is the Sanctuary Methodist. The Sanctuary Methodist is now lofts and apartments, co-ops and condos. And now we're heading to McBurney Park. McBurney Park is a masquerade, folks. McBurney Park, in fact, was so overcrowded that the bodies started rising to the surface shortly after they started developing the property as a residential neighborhood. Kids would come home with trophies on their handlebars. Oh, look at that, a human skull. Where'd you find that? Oh, found it in the park. That's nice. Little Fido might come home with a human hand or a femur in his mouth. Hey, little Charlie buddy, where'd you get that? He's not giving it up. It was overcrowded, and eventually they had to excavate the land, move about 500 bodies. And that didn't work, so eventually they had to raise the elevation of the land. You might notice that there's a Celtic cross and a Catholic cross on the property. Here's someone to explain sort of what went on.
My name is Mary, and my husband found work with the Canadian Pacific Railway. It was the only place willing to hire Irish immigrants because
So on the way back, who wants to know about the most famous ghost of all of Kingston? Would you like to meet her? There she is.
My name is Teresa Bean. I'm the most famous ghost in the history of Kingston. I'm also the most famous prostitute. You see, my father, Isaac, well, let's just say he wasn't the biggest fan of my career choices, but what really bothered him was when I got pregnant with my cousin's child. Don't judge me, he was my best customer. When he found out about this, my father raced down to my apartment on 346 King Street. In a rage, he confronted me in front of one of my customers. He yelled at me. He shoved me. He told me everything he truly thought of me. My customer gathered his belongings and fled, which wasn't very helpful to me at all. When he left, however, my father truly attracted the attention of the shopkeeper and landlord who worked in line below. He walked outside, saw my broken body on the ground, my father standing over it. Finally started to tell people how he truly killed me on that night. He was sentenced to the Rockwood Asylum.